Welcome back to Hardball. Media matters. We all know that. And Fox News are at war, and we knew that, too. The media watchdog group's main objective, of course, that's Media Matters, is to expose and challenge distortions made by the right-wing press. Fox News has been one of their primary targets, I'd say primary targets, and now the right-wing cable channel Fox is taking direct aim at Media Matters and calling for it to be stripped of its tax-exempt status. For more on this world, let's turn to political commentator Ron Reagan. Ron, thank you for joining us. Josh Marshall's editor of Talking Points Memo. Ron, it seems to me that the law is fairly clear. You get tax-exempt status unless you're in an actual partisan organization that promotes candidates, gets people elected. Even, but if you're just an ideological organization, I think it's fair to call Media Matters progressive in its orientation. Sure. You're entitled to your 501(c)(3), whatever. Your thoughts?
Yes, that's absolutely right. They haven't violated the law. They're not promoting specific political candidates. They're not training people in their media training organization to run for office as Republicans or work for Republican candidates. They're unabashed about their progressive leaning. But as you say, you can be ideological and be tax exempt. You simply can't be political, and they're not.
Josh Marshall, there's some group over in Virginia I've been familiar with years ago that does train people to win right-wing elections. I don't know what their tax status is. But your understanding of this fight, let's talk about the fight a bit, Josh, which is more interesting than the tax status. Fox is conservative. I mean, let's take a look, by the way, at this discussion between. Here's David Brooks, by the way, 2010 planning memo. It says criticizing Fox News has nothing to do with criticizing the press. Fox News is not a news organization. It is the de facto leader of the GOP, and has long past time it is treated as such by the media, elected officials, and the public. Fair assessment? Josh?
Pretty much. I mean, Fox has come up with this great thing for them where they've made a great business model out of being a propaganda operation. I know some people who work at Fox that I think are trying to be good journalists, but the institution itself operates as a wing of the Republican Party. There's just no getting around that. And I think that the issue for Fox is that that's no secret. And they've had critics over the years. They've even had, watchdog organizations. But Media Matters packs a bigger punch, and they're well-funded, and they're smart, and they do a good job.
They are tough.
And they've landed a few punches.
They've been after me on occasion, so I know how tough they are. Let's take a look here at, Ron, I want you to take a look at a conversation. I think it's very important in the history of the media. It's between Jon Stewart of Comedy Central, of course, and Chris Wallace. I think Chris Wallace laid down a very interesting line here on what Fox is all about. I think it's fair to say what he says now in this perhaps unrehearsed comment here than has ever been said by the advertising of Fox when they call themselves fair and balanced. Let's listen to Chris Wallace.
You believe that Fox News is exactly the ideological equivalent
I think
of
we're the
NBC
counterweight.
News.
I think we're the counterweight.
You believe that?
I think that they have a liberal agenda, and
Right.
I think we tell the other side of the story.
Well, there's an admission by Ron, and then Josh. He's not saying they're fair and balanced. He's saying they're a balancing act to what they perceive to be the point of view of the major broadcast networks, and I guess us.
That's right. And ABC, NBC, CBS, the New York Times, everybody else in the media is part of a liberal conspiracy, and poor, lonely little Fox is out there all on their own counterbalancing this. But, of course, he did admit in saying that they are, in fact, a conservative voice, a right-wing voice in the media. And the difference between Fox and, let's say, MSNBC, which I think we can say has probably the more progressive point of view of any of the networks out there, is that you and your fellow hosts and news people actually do stick to the facts. You don't go out and make things up. Fox makes things up.
Okay, let me go to Josh Marshall for that agreement or not agreement with that strong assessment, indictment, I'd call it, from Ron Reagan.
I think it's
Is it
frequently
true that Fox makes things up, that it has a propaganda feature?
They don't have the same journalistic standards of most of what I consider legitimate media. That doesn't mean all their stuff is off, but it is. I mean, there's a difference between coming from a point of view and not being honest with your viewers or your readers. And I think that is a line that Fox consistently crosses.
If you only watch Fox, and there's some people who do, and I think they're really in trouble personally. I think you'd be in trouble personally if you only watch, to be honest, with any network.
Yeah.
But because I think people, let me go back to Ron. You and I grew up, we made our own decisions. I don't have the same politics as my parents. You don't. I think you got to put your own stew together. You got to watch a little bit of this, a little bit of that. You got to read a certain magazine here. How do you do it? I mean, most people put things together intelligently. They don't ask some daddy to come along or mommy to come along and tell them what to think. You don't ask Roger Ailes to tell you what to think.
No, absolutely. You sample a variety of media, and you look for things that make sense to you. You may not be an expert in various policy areas, but you have common sense, and you ask yourself, does this pass the smell test? When I'm listening to Fox, and they're talking about how Obama is a racist and global warming is a giant, hoax perpetrated by thousands of scientists around the world. Does that make sense to you or not? And if it doesn't, you have to ask yourself about who's purveying that information.
But unfortunately, Josh, back to that question, I think some people want to be intellectually led. They walk around and say, I am a ditto head after listening to Limbaugh. Why would anybody want to be a ditto anything? A ditto husband, a ditto wife, a ditto anything. You want to be somewhat original, don't you? Something that's sort of self-determined, not something that's a derivative of what Rush Limbaugh was thinking or saying, let's put it that way, that afternoon.
I think both the left and the right have their own built-in characterological shortcomings. And I think on the right, there is a kind of an authoritarian mentality, which I think does prefer in some ways liking to be led and kind of get the sort of the authoritative line. But again, I think there's...
They like goose-stepping? What do you mean, authoritarian? That's pretty scary. You mean they actually do like being given orders?
Yeah, I think that I think that it is widely recognized that maybe not this cycle, but in the past, the Republican Party much more often nominates the front runner than the Democratic Party does.
Yeah.
That has to do with, that's a kind of a follow the leader mentality. That's not about goose stepping or leadership principles, stuff like that. It's a different kind of way of thinking about political action. But
and how does that fit into watching Fox?
What's that?
How's that fit in with watching Fox as a habit?
I think that there is a greater willingness to...
be told what to think.
Yeah, to be told what to think, to have a kind of a single line of opinion that you follow. But I want to come back to this basic point. There is a basic difference between reporting with a viewpoint and being and not being honest with your viewers. I think there's a lot of stuff that Fox reports that the people reporting it know it's not really true. And
yeah, by the way, you mentioned a couple people over there you rely on. I do think Shepard Smith. I think there's some people over there that are journalists.
Yeah, well, look, and there's people, there's not just the people in front of the camera. There's people there as grips and cameramen and all sorts of stuff. But again, the leadership of the organization and the basic tone and strategy, the indictment that Brock is making of Fox, in most cases, I think is pretty accurate.
And they'll get around to doing us in the next few hours, too.
As a news organization. Yeah.
Ron Reagan, it's great to have you on. Thanks, Ron. Thank you, Josh Marshall. Gentlemen, we agree. Didn't surprise me that we did, but we did. And we're thinking about it, by the way.